Hi, everybody. It is currently Tuesday, and my wife and I are out and about. In order to appropriately engage in social distancing, I'm wearing some attire that will keep people away from me. That's kind of a joke, but still funny. So today, let's talk about Jimmy Carter. Um, I am not a huge fan of Jimmy Carter, and so I reviewed all the Carter stuff before I decided to make this video. And when Jimmy Carter was elected, of course, the Republicans had a fairly bad reputation in that there was, of course, some problems with Nixon. The government had gone through a phase where they'd lied to the American people. The Pentagon Papers demonstrated that publicly upon their publication in the New York Times, and Watergate had and Spiro Agnew's tax problems had created problems for the Republicans. So Jimmy Carter was elected. He was a peanut farmer from Georgia, and he was a good guy. I mean, as humans go, he was a pretty good human. So when you put a good human into the Oval Office, I don't know if it's going to work out 100% because he does things, like tell the truth. And so Jimmy Carter finds himself at near the end of the Cold War. And so let's talk about some things he did really good. He signed a SALT treaty, a strategic arms limitation treaty, which is fantastic. Reducing the number of nuclear weapons is actually a good thing for our planet. Jimmy Carter was engaged in a Middle East peace process. He got the Palestinians and Israelis together at Camp David and signed the Camp David Accords, which unfortunately led to the assassination of Egypt's president, because a lot of Egyptians didn't like making peace with Israel. So Jimmy Carter wanted peace in the world. He actually was an idealist in that regard. Jimmy Carter didn't have a way of negotiating with people who didn't want peace. And I know that may sound weird, but one of the things that we saw in the Carter administration was the Iran hostage crisis. And when the Iran hostage crisis took place, here's what we know. Back in the 50s, the United States government helped overthrow the democratically elected government of Iran. And the United States government helped put in place Ravi Palavi, who was known as the Shah of Iran. He then, of course, took over the government and instituted a crackdown on political dissidents. People were killed, and Iran became a kingdom run by a king who was aligned with the United States during the Cold War. Well, there came a point where the religious establishment in Iran was fed up, and Muammar Gaddafi, sorry, wrong name, the Ayatollah Khomeini, I know I don't say it right, but Ayatollah Khomeini led a student uprising that took the American embassy workers hostage. And you can see we're moving. My wife has finished her job at her building, and so we were out and about doing some chores. But the Shah of Iran was overthrown, and the U.S. embassy personnel were held hostage for 444 days. And only when the election of 1980 took place were the hostages released. In fact, Carter tried to get them released in a military effort. There was a secret attack. Unfortunately, communication was bad, and one of the great problems occurred when communication didn't allow dust covers to be put on jet intakes, and then they went through the desert, and dust in jet intakes is a bad thing, and so there were crashes, and U.S. service people died. Who do you blame? Well, the buck stops at the top, and the Carter administration took the responsibility for the death of many dozens of U.S. servicemen in a failed attack to rescue an attempt to rescue the Iran hostages. And it wasn't until the election of Reagan, the day Reagan gets elected, the hostages are released. Was it out of fear of Reagan? Was it trolling Carter? Maybe it was both. So that didn't go well. That is unfortunately the Carter administration legacy that leads him to be ranked in a below average sense, like 26th on two polls I looked at this morning. The other thing I'm not a big fan about Carter is because I'm not a big fan of Carter because of is the energy crisis. OPEC, the oil producing countries of the Middle East, decided to cut production to increase prices, and it caused shortages in the United States. We were not producing much oil at the time. Our technology did not allow us to extract shale oil, but now we are the world's leading oil producer because we can get oil out of shale. That's why prices are so low right now, is that the Middle East has increased production in order to undercut U.S. costs. So in 1970s, Jimmy Carter suffered under both a stagflation, which is a unique economic condition of rising and lowering prices. We'll get to that probably on the Zoom meeting, but the economy was bad and oil was in short supply. There were lines at gas stations. There were some communities that could not get gasoline, which is a problem for an automobile nation like the United States. And Carter had no idea how to fix it. That no one had seen this condition before, and so Carter's experts had no idea how to fix it. We then get to strike 2 against Carter for most evaluations. And strike 3 is going to be the Panama Canal. Jimmy Carter, of course, was a fan and promoter of indigenous rights, and Carter looked at Panama and said, them poor old Panamanians, they don't have their own country. Well, what in fact is a Panamanian? Most of the residents of Panama were the descendants of the people who worked on the canal, who were largely Colombian and Egyptian. There was no nation state of Panama because the canal zone was seized by the United States and a fake French company so that we could have a two-ocean navy. In that sense, the Panama Canal is one of the largest strategic assets the United States has ever owned. And Jimmy Carter said, them poor old Panamanians, they don't even have their own country. And through a series of treaties, Panama was turned over to the local Panamanians. And I think I know what you're thinking, probably the same thing I am, that now we're not in control of that strategic asset. Do we now not have a two-ocean navy? Well, that's questionable. The first thing with the new Panamanian government did is that they sought a security firm to try to safeguard their Panama Canal Zone, which is a responsible choice, but they picked a Chinese company. So today, it is a Chinese company that controls the security of the Panama Canal Zone. I don't know if you feel good about that. I'm going to leave the Carter evaluation up to each individual person. We can talk about this on the Zoom meeting tomorrow. By the way, we have a Zoom meeting tomorrow at 1. So good Carter is that he's concerned about indigenous rights. He does sign the SALT Treaty. Carter he tries to get a national health care system produced and doesn't succeed in a bipartisan government. And strike 1 against Carter, of course, Iran hostage crisis. Strike 2 is the oil crisis, and strike 3 is the Panama Canal. So, like most presidents, we've got good and bad, and the reason that I use this context of good and bad is that tomorrow on the Zoom meeting, we're going to talk about Reagan, and some people get really mad about this. Reagan is a beloved president, and I'm going to say 3 really good things about Reagan, and I'm going to say 3 really bad things about Reagan, and so just be prepared for an honest evaluation. Your work this week that came to you in an email was a Reagan evaluation, and after our Zoom meeting, you can write that. It's challenging because the article that you were sent is a perspective piece, and the guy has a perspective. It's not a good one, and that's what we see in a lot of media today, is that there is a perspective. We have to be able to read through things like that and conduct a reasonable analysis. So I look forward to seeing you tomorrow and getting our chores done. I hope she hurries out of this building so we can get to Hardee's. See ya.